Letting your food rest after you cook it is a critical part of maximizing your flavor and your juiciness. But when it comes to sous vide, does it actually matter? I'm going to dive into that coming up next on Amazing Food Made Easy. Hey there, I'm Jason Logston from Amazing Food Made Easy and president of the International Sous Vide Association. And today I want to talk to you about whether you need to let meat rest after sous vide. A lot of people are curious about this because with traditional cooking, you almost always want to let your meat rest. Before we dive in and answer this question, I think it's important to know, why do you rest meat? What is the purpose of letting your meat sit after you cook it? And there's a few different reasons. The first is to kind of evenly distribute the heat throughout the meat. If you're cooking something on a grill or under the broiler, you have something called carryover temperature. And that's where if you want a medium rare steak, you want to pull it out at like 120, 125, and it's going to continue to heat because the outside of the meat's a lot hotter than the inside because it's been on that hot grill. And so you let it sit for a little bit, it continues to carry over the cooking process, and then it stops cooking at some point. And you want to make sure you give it plenty of time for that process to happen. Another important reason to let your meat rest is because it holds in a little more juices. If you cut your meat right away, a lot more juices come out. I'm sure some food scientists out there and chefs have done studies side by side showing what the differences are. I have not, but a lot of smart people tell me that this is the case. That if you take your beef tenderloin and you cook it on a grill and you cut it, you're going to lose more moisture than you would if you let it rest for 5 or 10 minutes. So that's another really big reason why you let food rest. So let's look at those two reasons why you let it rest in the context of sous vide. So the first was to evenly distribute the temperatures, deal with kind of the carryover cooking. And with sous vide, that really doesn't happen. If you're doing something on the fancier end, like Delta T cooking, maybe you have a little bit of carryover. But for most sous vide applications, you're cooking at the temperature that you want your food to end up at. So if you're cooking at 130, you don't need to pull it out and let it rest to evenly distribute the temperature because the entire cut of meat is already at 130, right? And that's where it comes in that you really don't need to let a lot of sous vide meat rest. And that brings us to the second point, letting those juices reabsorb in the meat. And with sous vide, a lot of times we're cooking at a low enough temperature that really doesn't matter. I don't know the specific temperature that you need to cook below, but I know at 130 and 140, there's a whole lot more juices stay in the meat than at higher temperatures. However, there are higher temperature sous vide applications. If you're making a brisket or you're doing a pot roast or shredded beef, all these can be cooked at higher temperatures in the 150s, 160s, 180s maybe. And when you get into those temperatures, then letting it rest afterwards to reabsorb some of those juices is not a bad idea. It's something that Crea recommends in their course, and other top chefs also recommend doing that as well. You give the meat a little bit more time to absorb the moisture, and you're going to have a juicier end product. The other thing to keep in mind with sous vide is that there's 2 more steps after sous vide. A lot of the resting, especially for the juiciness, is because you don't want to cut it right away. With sous vide, you're often going to sear it after you take it out of the bag, so you're not cutting it anyway. And that's a third reason to let it rest for sous vide, and that's because you can bring down that core temperature a little bit before you sear it. And that can help you give it a longer sear. It's going to be a little more crusty, a little more golden brown without raising that internal temperature. To accomplish that, you can let it rest on the counter for 10 to 15 minutes, or you can put it in an ice bath for 10 or 15 minutes and really drop it a lot more. But if you do go that route and chill it in an ice bath, and give it a lot longer sear, you are running into some of the issues that you could get in traditional cooking. So you may want to let it rest briefly after the sear just to let the juices reabsorb. Those are some of the goals that you would actually be trying to accomplish by letting your meat rest and how they apply to a lot of the types of sous vide cooking. For me personally, I almost never let my meat rest unless I'm doing a higher pot roast braise-like temperature. Then I let it cool in the bag. I usually chill it in an ice bath and I put it in the fridge overnight like I would for a traditional braise or pot roast. Then I can reheat it, give it a better sear the next day, and I feel like it holds a little bit more of the juiciness and the flavor in the meat. I have just pulled them out of the bag and cut them right away, and they're still excellent. So one of the benefits of sous vide cooking, what you make in it is going to be juicy, flavorful, tender, and amazing. And then you can do a few more things to push it another few notches up that quality standpoint. But it's going to be amazing and great on its own, so don't stress about it too much. So now you know the next time you're making a sous vide steak or some sous vide meat, whether or not you need to let it rest, and whether or not you can just dive in and enjoy it right away. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston.